Hello, my name is Jason Corbett. I'm the pastor at Journey Community Church in Vidalia, Georgia. You can find a link to our church website in the description of this video. This is the next video in our Life of Christ series, and you can find a complete playlist of those videos located beneath the video that you're currently watching. Today we're going to talk about the word law and how it's used in the New Testament. When you think about a law, you probably think about a rule or a regulation, or perhaps you think about the system or the power to enforce a rule or a regulation when you think about law. However, in the New Testament, the word law is used in many ways, but it is referring primarily to the Old Testament teachings that God gave through Moses. So let's talk about that for just a minute. When we're reading the New Testament and we come across the word law, let's look at the layers of how that word can be being used. Sometimes when you see the word law, it's referring to one of the 10 commandments. Usually this will be in the writings of the Apostle Paul, where he will reference a 10 commandment and then he will affirm the truth held therein, or he will add some to the principle, or he will clarify something about that Old Testament law that we find in one of the 10 commandments. These are the ones you think of when you think about the tablets of stone and Moses coming down from the mountain and giving them to the nation of Israel. So in the Old Testament, God gave the 10 commandments, but he also gave the law itself, the law that contained commandments and statutes and rules and testimonies for the everyday lives of the people of Israel. So at its most basic, when we talk about the law in the Old Testament, we're talking about the 10 commandments. But generally, when speaking about the law, the New Testament is referring to all of the rules and the regulations that were given to Moses for the government of the people of Israel during the Old Testament. It's important for us to understand that there were several words that were associated with law in the Old Testament, right? We have words like keep and walk in and do and obey, right? And ideas in the negative sense of not to forget, right? Or not to abandon or not to reject, right? And so in the New Testament, we're speaking of the 10 commandments, right? Or we're speaking of the whole of the law as it was given to Moses for the people of Israel. And often when Paul is writing about the law, he is referring to the commandments that were contained in that law, not just the 10 commandments, but the regulations for personal morality that are found in the Old Testament. The Old Testament regulates many parts of the life of the average everyday Israelite. Plus, it gives information and regulation for the priests and the Levites and the leaders and the various tribes. I mean, the law has this great deal of a wealth of information that it's giving to the people, right? It's talking about the relationship between the man himself and God. It's relationships one to another, family relationships, relationships between husbands and wives, parents and children, relationships about money, ideas about giving, ideas about religious structure, sacrificial system, scheduling times of worship. I mean, the law is replete with regulation and commandment and rules that the people of the nation of Israel were commanded by God to be obedient in following after, right? Now, as we read the Old Testament, we will see that the ideas that God had for the people and the commandments that God had for the people often conflicts with the ideas and the desires that the people themselves had for their own governance, for their own ways of thinking. And that's much of the conflict that we find in the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, when Jesus shows up on the scene, sometimes we have the idea that when Jesus comes to the earth, that the people of Israel kind of had this singular view of the law, this singular way that their culture and their religious behavior would happen and how they would interact with one another and what they would do for one another and what God wanted them to do. But that is not the case at all. There was much conflict among the various groups of thinkers and religious leaders and political movers and shakers as to what the role of the law was in the everyday person and how it was to impact people's everyday lives and what it was to mean to be Jewish in the first century and how it related to the people of Rome and to the local leadership. There was a lot going on in the minds and hearts of people as it regarded the law and its impact to them. Let's go on with our study though. So first of all, we have the Ten Commandments, right? And that's spoken to some in the New Testament. But most generally, when it speaks of the law, it's talking about the law as given to Moses through those ordinances, rules, and regulations that were handed to the people of Israel. There are times when the word law is used to reference what we might call the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Or it could actually be a reference to the law of God, to the law as the entirety of the Old Testament. Okay, so you have the Ten Commandments, you have the law as given to Moses, you have the first 5 books of the Old Testament where you would find that law written to Moses, and then you have the Old Testament as a whole. And so when you're reading the New Testament, you come across the word law, you have to use your spirit and your heart and your mind to interpret and to understand through research and through paying close attention, what is this word law referring to? However, to throw one more wrinkle into it, there are times, and the Apostle Paul is especially good about doing this in like Romans 6, Romans 7, Romans 8, right around there, of using the idea of the word law as a principle. You know, we have what we call the law of gravity, right? Or the principle of gravity. So there are times when the word law is used in the New Testament, not in a direct reference to an Old Testament rule or regulation, but to a general principle of how the earth works, how the body works, how the mind works, how sin works, etc., etc., etc. So sometimes when Paul's talking about a law, he's not necessarily pointing towards a specifically written down law in the New Testament. He's talking about a general principle of how things work for all people in all circumstances, in all situations, how a principle affects us, how a truth, a universal thing, a universal reality that all people have to deal with. There is one more wrinkle to add to this, okay? So when we think about the law in the Old Testament, we're thinking about 10 Commandments. We're talking about what God gave to Moses to govern the people of Israel. Perhaps we're thinking about those first 5 books of the Old Testament, or we're thinking about the Old Testament as a whole. But when Jesus comes, He's also dealing what we would call oral tradition, or man's interpretation of the law. So when Jesus is talking to the people of Israel, often He is interacting with them and He is describing, dissecting, how do we say this? He is interacting with their understanding of the 10 Commandments, or the Mosaic Law, or the Old Testament as a whole, or a principle that God revealed through Moses in the Old Testament. He's talking about one of these layers that we're talking about here, something that all the people would have either read or memorized or had read to them. But very often, Jesus is also interacting with the traditions of men that had arisen from the various understandings about the Old Testament, the various opinions of the various groups and how they saw the Old Testament, right? So it's important for us to understand that Jesus is almost simultaneously talking about the true principles that God gave in the Old Testament, but He's also discussing the ideas and the ideologies that had arisen in men's minds about the nature of God from the Old Testament. This is not at all dissimilar to what we are dealing with here in 2020. When we talk about Jesus, we talk about forgiveness, we talk about grace, we talk about mercy, the cross, righteousness, morality, truth, right? Well, we're not only dealing with, when we speak about those things, what is written in the New Testament for those of us in the church age, but we're also having to deal with very much in our own minds, in our culture, and how we discuss things, the traditions that have arisen from the various interpretations of the words that we read, right? And there's nothing new under the sun, right? It continues to repeat itself. So to summarize, when we read the Old Testament, we will often find the Apostle Paul and the other writers focusing in on the Ten Commandments and how they relate to us today and how they interplay with us in our modern world and what we are to do with those commandments and what does that mean for the believer who is under grace and not under law, right? But most of the time, when the writer is talking about the law, he's referring to the actual law as given to Moses. The many commandments, rules, statutes, ordinances, those things that regarded the ceremonies of the day, the personal behaviors of the day, the way that people conducted their business, all of those things. Sometimes the New Testament is referring to that and how it interacts with us today. Once in a while, there are many times when the New Testament as it refers to the law is talking about just the Old Testament, the first 5 books, or the full Old Testament as the scriptures, the ancient writings, the writings that they would have had access to understand what God's will was and God's story with the people of Israel and the prophecies that He had given, etc., etc., etc. So it's important as we're reading to pay close attention to what's going on there. And remember those other 2 ways, right? Are we discussing an oral tradition that arose from the law? Jesus will say stuff like this, you have heard it said, right? Pay close attention to what He's doing there. Often when He's doing that, He's talking about an oral tradition. Or often He'll say, you say, but I, right? Or your father said, right? Pay close attention because he's doing something there that's pretty remarkable. He's answering a theological question that we may not have necessarily in 2020, but that those people would have really been focusing on. And His answers can sometimes be surprising and enlightening. And then finally, is it using the word law to simply mean a general principle, a universal truth, a reality with which we all deal? These are various ways that it uses the word law in the New Testament. There are people who have studied this for many more years than I have, but I hope this brief summary will give you a better understanding when reading the New Testament, an appreciation for what God was doing in the Old Testament, and some hope and some revelation in the power of what grace is. As Paul says here in Romans 3:21, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, being justified as a gift by His grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus. So if we study out what those words law there mean, in that context of Romans and how Paul is talking to Jewish readers and Gentile readers, and we can begin to see some miraculous, powerful truths that are coming through that text. As God reveals that a man can be made right with Him not through strict adherence to rules and regulations given through Moses, but through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the impact of the cross is made that much more beautiful when we understand the law, its beauty, and its limitations. Thank you guys so much for listening to me, and I hope you'll join me again on Sunday. Have a blessed day.